Operator Syndrome, episode 43. Today we're talking about schools. We're not talking about the pipeline to become a Navy SEAL. It's been done. We're not talking about how short the training is to become a Ranger. It's been done. We're going to talk about the other opportunities that are presented to you if you should make it into those units along the way. Things you can do, schools you can attend, schools we attended um, that give you a unique skill set or capability. Um, and this will be a little bit different because it's not rooted in a timeline. We're just going to talk about some of the random things we've done. Um, I guess we should start off with, I'll talk about this knife fighting school I went to.
I want to
Uh,
hear about this one.
so, um, where to begin? I am not a combatives guy. Never really have been. I'm a lover, not a fighter. Um,
Me too.
so I never did boxing. Whatever jujitsu or ground fighting that I ever experienced was with my, rolling around with your brothers. That's about it. That's about it. But other than that, the first organized combatives I ever did was when I showed up to the army. They had like a very basic combatives program that you started in basic training when I went
Mhm.
through in 2005. So I got introduced to some basic things there, some holds, grappling techniques, stuff like that, which I thought was cool. But again, it's just not something that just really interested me,
Right.
um,
Was
just
that at RIP?
no, this was basic training I'm talking about.
Basic. This is okay. Basic.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Um, yeah, there was a lot about the curriculum at basic training in 2005 that looking back, and hearing what others had gone through, a little bit before me or even after me, clearly they had spent a lot of time updating the curriculum for Army infantry basic training, in 2005. I'm guessing based on what they learned from the 4 years prior, right? From
Yep.
2001 on. So I feel like I was a recipient of, for basic training, right?
Right. Right.
A pretty decent curriculum. Um, so in RIP combatives was they would make us fight each other, but it wasn't it wasn't really. I don't remember it being like a training event.
It was a
Uh,
slugfest. And you were trying to not get hurt, if I
yeah,
remember
yeah,
correctly.
yeah, exactly. I mean, hey, that's all the time. I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
never trying to
Yeah.
get.
Yeah.
I'm not looking to get hurt at any time, but
No.
especially not when I'm trying to get selected for something.
Right.
So, but like we said, we're not talking about pipelines necessarily. So this knife fighting school, um, and I've been thinking about how much I want to say about the school, particulars about the school I want to say, just because you know I don't know if they're still sending folks to it, but in my time, it seemed like everybody was being sent to it. When you became a team leader and a line team leader, you got the opportunity to go to this course. I'm not quite sure I want to say the name of the course, but I'll talk about what we learned there. Just because we were sending so many guys, I don't want to
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
to some dude
Right.
where a bunch of Rangers are training. So so they told me, hey, you're going to this school. The one thing I knew about this school was that every time guys came back, like magic, a fixed blade ended up on their kit. That's how you
Yeah.
that's how
I
you
can
could
see
tell they had just come from the school.
that.
So um I'd see all these guys with fixed blades, on their kit somewhere, and they'd be like, oh, they went to this course. And so they were so I was it was, I think it was like a block. I think it was after, I don't remember, but they said, "Hey, you're going to it." And I was like, "All right, fine, I'm going to it." Um, Flew there. It was a group of us. This was a major metropolitan area. I don't know if I've ever said the city, but I'm just not going to say it. But it's a major metropolitan area. And we went from our battalion. I'd say there were like 10 of us that went. Um, all tabs, team
Uh-huh.
leaders and up, squad leaders. I think there was a guy who was a platoon sergeant who was going there too. So we go to this course, we show up, we're in civies, we get to be like very uncharacteristically, like dress down,
Oh yeah, like
relax,
seals, like
like
seals.
seals. We got to play seals
Finally.
for a week. It's what we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
So we go to this place. It's in the suburb area of this major city. Um, uh, it's like a fighting gym. It's like a fighting gym attached to like a big like regular gym. So we would go in. First day we go in, and you see like dudes in like tank tops and like ladies in their
Right.
yoga pants. We're like, this is where we're gonna learn this combatives fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could be like a Gold's Gym or whatever.
So it was civilian for starters.
It's a
Okay.
civilian
Okay.
course. The
All right.
civilian course. So we show up, and you don't start with blades to begin with. Um, it's very, very, just mats, not a whole bunch of stuff there. And then you meet this instructor guy, and this dude was intense, and he was really intense. But I guess his story was he had been, I think he had been a Ranger Regiment guy who would spend some time there, and I guess he had spent some time in the Green Berets as well. He'd gone to SF, which in like the you know 80s and 90s was a common path that folks would go from the Ranger Regiment, and then they'd spend some time in Special Forces, and he was one of those
Yeah.
guys. But he was one of his claims to fame were or the lore that built up before he went to this course was that this guy had like the fastest hands.
Hmm.
Like the fastest hands is what they talked about. Guys were saying like, yeah, you can find YouTube videos about this guy. Like that's how fast his hands moves. And this it moves. And this was in the early days of YouTube, right? Back when it was only silly shit like
Yeah.
this. So apparently that was part of his background. Um, but the idea of this the idea behind this combatives was um you know hand strikes, not a lot of kicking.
Right.
It was assuming that you would end up on the ground. So
Mhm.
but the idea was it was like a progressive thing to get back to your weapon. Ultimately was what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
It
good.
was a fighting style. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but it made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
um Go ahead. You're gonna ask a question.
Did I'm so fascinated by people. There's so many outside of the box martial arts forms.
Yeah.
Did, do you recall, was his background? There's something called eskrima. Eskrima. It's a Filipino Jeet Kune Do, and they're big into knife disarming.
You know what? I think I vaguely again. I wasn't the
Yeah.
guy who geeked out on everything he
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
I was there to hang out, TDY. But
Right.
but I think it was rooted in something like that. And I
Yeah.
missed like an important part of the
Yeah.
lore, which was people were saying that this guy came up with his technique, and he honed it by
Yeah.
intentionally getting into street fights
Huh.
in the city that he was in.
It
Uh,
wasn't Dan Inosanto, was it?
It was not. That's
No.
that's
Okay.
not the name.
All right.
If you
Just
get if you
just
guess the
just
name, then
curious.
if you guess the name, then I'll just go with it because you must be thinking
No,
of
I'm not going to
somebody
guess anymore.
else. But the basic premise of his style of fighting was that should you end up unarmed, here is how you should strike. In the first half
Okay.
of the course, I believe, was just fists, right?
Mm-hmm.
But his style of fighting was that the way you could fight with fists, the strikes you would do, the ways you would protect and defend yourself is interchangeable if you had a fixed blade.
Okay.
It's the same exact movements you would use if you had a blade on you, and he would advocate for the use of fixed blades. He said, he had some use cases where in combat, where not him necessarily, but use cases that he had collected from the joint force to say, hey, here are some situations where a fixed blade could have been extremely helpful, or was extremely helpful. But his whole technique was get back to your weapon, right? Get back to
Yeah.
your weapon, get back to your team. If you're fighting by yourself, something's wrong, right?
Oh, yeah.
So to me who wasn't like a combatives guy, everything he was saying made sense. The
One thing to interject,
Go ahead.
just to jargonize, in case our listeners don't know, a fixed blade versus a folding blade. You may know this already, but we talk in these terms, and I just want to make sure it's clear. A fixed blade is it doesn't fold. It is one steel spine that runs from the hilt to the tip, and it does not fold up. So you're not going to have the problem potentially. I think this is probably where this guy was going with, if you have like a folding blade, like a lot of Benchmade knives fold, and a lot of cool guy knives we carry will fold out, no lock, but sometimes you don't know if they're locked, and sometimes something could get wedged in there and it's not locked, and you can come back and cut your knuckles halfway off. So I can see the wisdom in, yeah, if I was going to be in a knife fight and you say choose any knife, I'll grab a fixed blade because it's in my hand. I know it's one less thing is going to happen is it's going to fold up on me or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway.
And he spent, that's good clarification. And we spent like a decent amount of time talking about the characteristics of a fixed blade you would want for combat that you should carry. You know, one of the obvious things is that you want some kind of, is it not pommel, you know, in the grip where you have like the cross, you
Yeah,
want something to keep your hand from continuing forward into the blade, right?
to
It's,
stop it from going
yeah,
too far. Yeah.
whatever that's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called. I watch a lot of that show where they make blades, but I cannot remember what that thing is called. Anyways, so so we talked a lot about that. Again, the curriculum started off, it's all fists, techniques you can use just with your fists, and then upgraded to actually using like dummy knives in the same techniques. The interesting, what I thought was really interesting is that this fighting style um, was not like one and one. We upgraded how many people we were fighting. So you would do, you know, you do like pair up, you know, do some moves.
Mm-hmm.
But the progression would be you'd go and fight up to four dudes at one time.
I could, yeah.
Yeah, and it was, and I that blew my mind. I was like, I'm fighting four guys. I'm
Well,
fighting
that's
four guys.
good. That's good pedagogy. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. It was interesting. And so you would, you know, throughout this, and I think we were there a week. It's like probably a week,
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 days. But you'd work your way up doing the you know fist fighting techniques, and then everyone else would put on like you know like the pads, you
Yeah.
know whatever, the red man gear, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And then and then you do fists, and then we transition to the blades and working with the blades. Um, and so, you know, I thought it was extremely valuable, even for a dude who didn't, who wasn't into all that kind of stuff necessarily. Um,
Yeah.
and you know, by the end of it, I get back, and the first thing I do is put a fixed blade on.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
But also, what would happen is that's how you could tell dudes who had just come back from that, you
Yes, of
know,
course.
because what happened is they put it on, and then, you know, after one or two deployments where you don't knife fight anyone, you know, and all you do is use it to open up things, you
Yeah.
eventually take it off your kit, and that's sort of.
Right, right. I know.
But yeah, so
That's really cool.
that's the knife fighting school. They don't bill it as that. They just use the name of the school. But yeah, knife fighting for dudes with knives.
I love it.
That's one of the opportunities afforded to me in my time.
I love
Um,
it.
did you anything combatives related you were
Yeah.
given an opportunity to do?
Yeah, Hickson taught me early on.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, um, defense against knife and gun, even, which is, I pray I don't ever have that situation. But yeah, but his was mostly like cupping and scooping the blade down to where you could, get on top, and you might get cut. He said just be prepared to get some nicks, but yeah, that kind of stuff. And gun, God forbid you have to fight somebody who's got a draw, but you got to do something. I mean, if
Mhm.
somebody's pulled out a gun and pointing at you, you're gonna roll over, you know. So yeah, we did some of that. Um, but we always had a joke in the SEALs. We said, "Oh, I'm gonna go to underwater knife fighting school," like like some James Bond thing, like
Yeah.
where you would learn. But
The
it was
Thunderball.
no, there was no such thing. But the fixed blades, maybe in one of these episodes, I'm gonna show you. I got my dad for his for my parents' anniversary. there's a Kentucky knife maker right down the road from me, and he does amazing work. And I got him a fixed blade, really cool knife. I'm going to bring it in here for the next show and show that, just because in honor of fixed blades.
Nice.
It's badass. But yeah, no, I don't want to fight you, Patrick, with a knife.
The
Anything
funny,
but that.
it's funny what you said about getting nicked up in a knife fight, because
Yeah.
it had never crossed my mind. But we had talked about, we got into the mindset of what it's like if you're in a knife fight, right? Like you're sacrifice, you're
Yeah.
sacrificing, your arm is like you can put it in a defensive posture and you can use it, but like you're gonna be turning your arms into hamburger, right?
Yeah,
Like
for
defending
sure.
yourself and going offensive with a
Yeah.
knife. It's pretty gnarly.
The suck factor is going to be very high.
Yeah, it's not gonna be a comfortable thing.
No.
Um, in terms of so there finally did it, told the knife fighting story. Um, in terms of some other schools opportunities, and
Yeah,
just sort of at a broader level, this is a thought that I had that I thought was interesting. I wanted to run it by you, which is, um, in the Ranger Regiment, you have the Army at your disposal. The the Army loves the Ranger Regiment.
of course.
That's the relationship. And the Army has a lot of applicable schooling and schoolhouses that Rangers can take advantage of. And I thought that was probably a lot different compared to the SEALs, who are unique. I'm guessing the Navy loves its SEALs, but there are not like a lot of other schools or units in the Navy that you could
Yeah.
take advantage of like the schooling, right? So like for a Ranger, there are like traditional schoolhouses that you might want to go. You might want to go to Pathfinder, right? The Army, we love our badges,
Is
and Boy
that
Scouts.
mostly a recon school?
Pathfinder, and again, of course the disclaimer, I'm talking about the time I was in. Things are different. I'm vaguely aware that they might have shut down or limited the
Hmm.
Pathfinder school, but the
Hmm.
Pathfinder school was, a military Pathfinder is basically what the like CCTs have turned into, Air Force CC
Okay.
combat controllers have turned into. But
Okay.
if you think back to World War II, there were groups of paratroopers who jumped ahead of the main body to establish the drop zones, right? And they'd have all their markers and they do all this kind of stuff. The Pathfinder school and the Pathfinder badge represent training similar to that, like a modern version of that.
Gotcha.
They've got like a cool badge, just like a torch with wings on it. So yeah,
Yeah.
so for us as we progressed, and if and when there was time, we had a lot of regular Army schools we could go to and take advantage of. Um, but I'm guessing that wasn't quite the same. All the schooling you would go to, you all would have to source from outside vendors, right?
Almost exclusively. Yeah, that's a good point. I never really thought about it. I jotted down some schools I went to, and I've talked about the big ones. For me, the big schools were Sodic and Sephartic, but those were
Hmm.
special forces schools, of
Yeah,
course. Those were clearly the most difficult, most arduous, and most prestigious of any schools I ever went to, other than maybe Buds, um, or up on the level of Buds. But yeah, so God, we went to so many crazy schools. I'll just name a few, and I don't even really want to talk about them because they were so boring.
let's hear 'em.
I had to go because I was an because I was an air guy, they called me, right? So everything to do with aircraft, fast ropes, parachuting. I was a jump master, blah, 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 blah. I had to go to a school. It was an Air Force school called Aircraft Load Planners School. Just ran across a certificate the other day, going through my files for my VA claim. I had to go to it's basically a big math course in how to balance different aircraft. From back in my day, it was C-141, C-5s. Now they've moved on. Big cargo jet or Hercules. They still have C-130s. And you had to balance a load. You had to plan, like calculate a load and balance it out. Because in an aircraft, you've got this point of gravity that you have to maintain to keep the thing stable and fuel efficient and all this. That was the most boring school I ever went to, but by God, I'm a certified Air Force load planner. So I can pack a cargo plane. I've forgotten all of it, but there's one. But there's Air Force, right?
Mhm.
A lot of them, like one of my favorite schools, just it wasn't very long. It was like 2 weeks. Was Spirig. Um, Spirig, they don't use it anymore, really. But I had to learn it because it was part of the toolkit of an air guy. It's called SPY is an acronym for Special Patrol Insertion and Extraction Rig. So it's a row. It is really freaking fun to do because you've got basically a harness on a full. It's almost like a jump harness, but you don't have a parachute. But shoulders, belt, legs are all harnessed in, and a carabiner or a D ring like right in the middle. So it's fairly comfortable. I've had worse rides, and so this big rope just comes down from a helicopter, and it's got a penetrator on the bottom, which is like a heavy steel, kind of looks like a big bowling pin, but it's designed to get through like jungle canopy to get down to where, like, if you've got a squad on the ground, and it was only designed, I think you could only hold 8 or 10 guys max on one of these. They could get this thing down into the jungle, and then guys would just clip in. They would kind of lay it out. And some guys might have to be climbing the rope and clipping in a little bit, depending on how much they could lay it out along the floor of a jungle. But we did that school, Spirig School. I did it with my chief in my first platoon because he wanted to go to the school, and I was an air guy. So he's like, "Come on, we're going." I was like, "Aye, aye, chief, let's go." And but what I remember most, not only was it fun because once you clip in, the helicopter just pulls you out and you just goes for these joy rides out over the Pacific Ocean, and you're just flying like Superman. I mean, you're just, whoa, yay. It's pretty cool. It's a hooyah. But had to learn how to rig it and how to talk to the air crews to get it in. But the coolest thing of all was it was the first Marine I had ever trained with. So our instructor was a gunnery sergeant, Marine Force Recon. Second, this is where we need our Marine friend to help us. He's emailed us as well.
Mhm.
I think it was Second Force Recon. It was out at Camp Pendleton. But anyway, it was the Force Recon group out there, and he was so squared away. I couldn't. I was so impressed because I've been dealing with these SEAL jokers for long enough, and I say that with all due reverence to my brothers, but we just like to joke around a lot. This guy was so squared away, I couldn't believe it. He knew every mark, mod, everything of everything, and it was just so on the nuggets, like precise. I was like, this guy's inspiring. You know, I want to go be a Force Recon Marine now because there was something in the nomenclature and all of his accuracy that was great. But anyway, that was a fun school. It was very short. But back to Patrick's point, yeah, it was again, it was a Marine school. Yeah, I can't think really of any. We went to a school, well, we went to SERE School. That might be a whole nother episode. That's a bigger deal. Um, we went to a school in the Philippines called JEST. And I always wanted to write a short story about this one because I thought, again, it's an acronym for JEST, which I think was Jungle Escape and Survival Training. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. It was a jungle survival school. I'll put it that way. And it was run by Filipino. I don't even know if they were part of the Filipino military. I think some of them were, but some of them were tribal people out in the jungles of the Philippines, and they were called negritos. Negrito in Tagalog and Filipino language is like little black person. They looked, most of them looked like from Africa. I mean, curly hair, totally dark skin. And it was wild because they lived in the jungle. They're like hunter gatherers
Mm,
like today. But man, if you want to survive in that jungle, go talk to these guys because
no
these
doubt.
guys, yeah, they are living like I went into the village, a funny story, and they're very small. I'm a small guy. I'm 5'8", right? So I'm not on the tall end of the spectrum. These people, the tallest one came up to like my chest level.
No
So
kidding.
it's almost like pygmy kind of height or something. Well, we walked into their village. I mean, we had trekked across a little bit of triple canopy and got into their village, and there was this little girl, and really sweet, like I mean, maybe 10, 12, 13 years old girl, and she had a pet monkey, a rhesus monkey, and it was like, just looking around. I was like, wow, that's really cute. And she was feeding it, they have bananas over there like this big, and she's feeding
Mm-hmm.
it bananas. I'm like, can I feed it a banana? I'll buy a banana just to feed this thing because that's cool. We don't have monkeys in Kentucky. Go figure. And I, but this girl had a rapport with this monkey that was really cool. Like it knew her, she knew it, and she goes, oh, she was like giggling at me. She hands me the banana, and I handed her a couple bucks or something. And I go over to give the monkey the banana, and it nearly ripped my finger off.
No
It
kidding.
was like, and it grabbed onto me, and it was so little. I was like, oh my God, I've never felt that force from a creature that small. Anyway, they trained us in how to survive in the jungle, these negritos who lived like seriously with machetes. I think that's all the only tool work they had. I mean, no running water, no electricity. The school was really interesting. It was super interesting because they would tell, okay, like you can eat this plant will kill you, and it looks just like this plant. And we're like, oh boy, I'm not even going to try this if we have to go on E&E, escape and evade or whatever. But what was so crazy was it was very impractical for what we did as SEALs. And much like Rangers, you're going in on a overnight raid most of the time.
Right.
If it stretches into 2 days, you're in a shitstorm that you didn't plan on. Then you're just looking for water and get us the hell out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're not going in to like live in the jungle for a week or two or three.
Or if you do, you're packing accordingly, right? You're
You're
bringing.
packing.
You're not going to be like surprise survive.
No,
It's not supposed to be that way.
that's right. We've got all our gear.
Yeah.
It's not going to be this big a deal. So this school, Jest, and these people, God bless them, they were great, and they were great instructors because a lot of them didn't speak English. We had translators, but it was a lot of really interesting stuff about the jungle. I mean, really interesting, but totally impractical from our point of view as direct action assaulters. Like we, and so the funniest part of the chorus was like Mike, who I've referenced before, Mike Bailey. He was a Vietnam legend, fought in every kind of fight you'd ever imagine in Vietnam. And he was walking right next to me, and he's the most sarcastic, funny guy you could ever imagine. And so I kind of listened to him comment on all of these techniques. And like I say, we weren't making fun. They were doing their best and they were teaching us good stuff, but it was just funny because the disconnect from what we would be doing in a regular mission was so different. But it was cool. It was fun. So they're teaching us how to build a fire like with nothing, like with a piece of bamboo and a machete. And it was cool, but we'd be E&ing out the hell out of there before we'd even be trying to start a fire. For one, the jungle's pretty warm anyway. And then they would be like, okay, see this? This is they would cut like a 6-inch piece of bamboo and like split it down the middle. And they would say, now see, you put water in here, you make a fire, and you wrap it with bamboo cord, and it's a rice cooker. And we're like, a rice cooker? Okay. All right. But we're thinking like, what kind of missions are we going to be doing? we're not going to be cooking rice. That's for sure. So then the final, one of the funniest is there was this plant. It was some sort of leaf that had like some barbed, like prickly things on the bottom of the leaf. And the guy said, "Look," and here I'm walking along with Mike, the biggest joker on the planet. So you got to remember that. And I'm like, that's interesting. Yeah. And he goes, "Check it out." And he got a piece of wood and he turned the leaf upside down and he started like sanding the wood because the prickly barbs on the bottom, it could serve like as a sandpaper. And Mike just looks at me. He goes, and he looked at the translator, and the translator said, "Sandpaper, sandpaper." And I was like, "Okay, got it, got it. Good luck for me ever finding that leaf in the jungle, but I got it." And Mike just taps me on the shoulder. And he goes, and this is a Vietnam seasoned seal. Okay. He goes, I can't count the number of times I've been on an ambush in the jungle and needed sandpaper. Like,
Yeah.
what's that all about?
I was
We,
gonna
we
say,
just
take note of that so you don't wipe with it, at the
ah,
very least.
don't worry. But it was just all this crazy stuff. Probably the most impractical school I ever went to. Lest I my plane goes down in a triple canopy jungle, and then maybe I'll use it. But crazy another school story.
Yeah, those type of opportunities. Yeah, you could. There are definitely times in history. It's one of those things. If you look back in history, there were some units that probably could have benefited. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of like the Merrill's Marauders.
Right.
Connect him
Right.
back to,
Right.
those dudes lived off the land,
Mhm.
foraging, walking through the jungle. I think it was Burma, right? Um,
Burma. That's right. The Burma campaign.
yeah, so they're perhaps historic, but yeah, in modern times, probably pretty impractical. I never did SERE. SERE is not something that was built into our our training pipeline, if you want to call it that. At the time, it was something optional for us at Fort Benning at Third Bet. We were pretty close to Fort Rucker. I believe all um, Army aviators, the folks who fly our helicopters, they do need to go to SERE, and they have SERE at Rucker. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things, like if you want to go to it, it's pretty easy to get you a slot to go down there. And I was on staff duty once, and I picked up a couple of our guys who had just finished up, and they were still basking in the glow of of having come from SERE.
Oh,
I was like, what's the matter with you guys?
yeah,
They're like,
really.
just go get it. Let's just go get a burger and then take us home.
Oh, yeah, because okay, so SERE for those, it's survive, escape, resist, and evade, I believe is the acronym.
That sounds right.
It's now I think all pilots have to go to that, like, or by requirement, or fighter pilots, let's say, because if you're shot down, it's a school that teaches you the most valuable thing they teach you. We had to go to it. It was a requirement for SEALs. And maybe it's just because we worked on a smaller unit level. I mean,
Probably. That
I mean,
makes
you
sense.
think about it. I mean, you're a bunch of Rangers. You're gonna have a fight on your hand, try to capture. I mean, you got a lot of friends out there.
We roll heavy. Yeah.
You roll heavy, and
Yeah.
it's not. Yeah. Um, and also, SEALs like in Vietnam, our forerunners in Vietnam, the Vietnam era SEALs, they went on a lot of hostage rescues. They rescued down pilots way behind enemy lines, and some of them were 2 3 man operations. So yeah, you could see why SERE would be important, because if you get captured, which that was the number one problem for pilots, fighter pilots in Vietnam, they would get shot down, end up in the Hanoi Hilton or somewhere else. They had to know how to negotiate, basically, is the best word for it. And what I learned in SERE School, and by the way, when I went through SERE School, everybody, they waterboarded us. They genuinely waterboarded us. I mean, where we're choking and coughing and sputtering, they don't do that anymore, because I think they decided if it's bad for the terrorists, then probably we shouldn't do it to our own people. Interesting. I mean, it didn't
Mhm.
hurt us. It was very uncomfortable. Of course, we were used to choking in water, but yeah, it still sucked. Anyway, they don't do it anymore. But it was basically part of it was how to resist without giving up crucial information. So, how to give your name, rank, serial number, and they did a lot of like case studies and the greatest POWs that ever lived, and like Admiral Stockdale was one of them. I mean, he was a stoic man. I mean, he that guy really did some heroic stuff. And I think he was in the Hanoi Hilton in Hanoi. Um, but it was things like how to like obfuscate stuff. So the enemy, and you've always got the advantage of the English language, like we do. And they're trying to use interpreters, so you can mess with language and make them like try to say something, and they think you're trying to tell them what's going on, and you're really just trying to be confusing to them because you don't want to give up information about for sure your troop or you're not going to give up our precious intel.
Right.
Like one of the guys, the story they told was this guy, this legendary guy, he was on a ship, and I don't know how he ended up in Viet Cong or North Vietnamese captors, but he was blown off the ship. They got him, and they were like, "How big were the guns on the ship?" They were trying to ask him this, and he was like, "Well, from where I was standing on the deck, they were about that big." Because like he's looking way up, and he's just making things confusing. He's like, I don't know, but he probably knew these are 16-inch cannons or something, but he was doing it enough. So a lot of SERE School was just teaching you how to be elusive and to give them enough, but not give them crucial information. So, and then it sucked because you had to go without food and they hunted you down and you had to live in these little cages, and they played, you know, recordings of America sucks, all these recordings that are supposed to be brainwashing and all that. But it wasn't that bad. I think it was about a 3-week school. That was good.
So a lot of great opportunities even after your pipeline selection.
Yeah.
Um, that's going to be it for this one. We'll catch you on the next time.